Thank you for your argument, Susan Pacific. We will respectfully disagree with you in that it was morally wrong for the social worker to take the child into her home for the night. We agree with you that the social worker is in a very tough spot, especially with the job being what it is, interacting with children, foster children, on such a personal level. But we believe that that makes it all the more important that she try to maintain some boundaries when she involves herself with these children. So this is to say, on a professional level, the social worker needs to be a mediator between the foster child and potential foster families. Getting involved past that can muddy the waters a little bit and can certainly become a conflict of interest if she involves herself too much with either party, as she was doing, involving herself with the child in this case. Another thing you didn't touch on as much, but I think is a very important part of this case, is that the social worker is not a registered foster parent, so to take her into her home for the night is not only breaking the professional code of ethics, but also a code that she should be following and making sure the child should be staying with a foster family. Even if it means she can't stay with herself, that's something she should still try to uphold. Again, another thing that she does on a professional level is tell a lie in the report that she writes up about taking this child into her home for the night. That's just morally wrong from a professional standpoint. You talk about a little bit the potential that the child could stay at a police station or hospital for the night. The case doesn't really touch on that at all. It only touches on this place for teenagers called Interface. We believe that's a viable option, if only just for the night. We think that this social worker could handle the situation by herself the next day so that she doesn't have to spend more than a night at Interface, but we're dismissing the potential for her to have to stay at a police department or a hospital for the night. We talked a little bit about the professional level on which the social worker needs to act as a mediator with the child in question, but there's also a personal level because, like you said, it's a very complicated job that the social worker has to do, walking a very tight line between being a professional, but then also having this personal relationship, because she is in charge of finding a home for this child, helping this child become the best possible person for adulthood. The child, though, is too young to understand the good-heartedness of the social worker in this case. That is to say that as an 8-year-old, and the case outline says this, research suggests that children's self-esteem is strongly linked to the sense that they are loved, and some have argued that children have the right to be loved. That means that they're just they're very influential, they're very vulnerable at this age. So to have them in one home one night, take them into a social worker's home the next night, and then be somewhere else the following night, the social worker's role in this child's life could be very easily misconstrued in the child's eyes. And this isn't even mentioning the fact that the social worker has a 12-year-old son, and his identity in his own home could come into question if the social worker keeps bringing in children and treating them like they belong in the home, even though the social worker's main job is to take these children and place them in foster homes. You talk about the principle of human dignity with negative rights, not bringing harm to other people. We don't think that the social worker, by putting this child in Interface for the night, would bring harm on her or anyone else. We think it's the ethically viable option. Positive rights, the requirement to care for other people. We think that the social worker is doing this by placing the child in Interface for the night. She is caring for the child so that she can care for her in the long run, because it is a conflict of interest. If the child stays at her home for the night, she might feel the need then to back off, maybe not involve herself with the child as much, despite the strong bond that she feels with the little girl. And 20 seconds.
So in that sense, the greater happiness result is kind of contentious if we think about the scope of the duties of the the social worker in comparison to, let's say, a foster parent, and also in terms of Bethany's own development, consider that more closely. She may actually, suffer in the long run for certain reasons. Yeah.
That's fine. All right, thank you very much. Lee, you have 1 minute to prepare. That's one. You guys now have 5 minutes to present.
Okay, yeah, we'd like to thank Carleton College for being here with us today. Thank you for your objections. We feel that we can address them, and we're going to try and do just that. So here's Austin.
Yeah, first of all, I want to point out the fact that you gave what appeared to be a strong man's argument in saying that it's always wrong to lie. I want to inform it as that it's not always morally wrong to tell a lie. There are some scenarios which I think you could agree with me in this given a scenario. If the Nazi soldiers came to your front door and told you, do you have any Jews inside your house? And you actually had some Jews in your house, in order to preserve the greater common good, you would tell the Nazi soldiers no, in order to protect themselves as well as yourself from that harm that they may inflict upon you as being a dissenter against their political agenda at the time. So I just want to go ahead and relate that, and how that's a utilitarian perspective, and how that's achieving a greater common good, and how that relates to the case of Maria as a social worker, that she lied in her report in order to preserve a greater good and relieving the child that's the dependent of the state from a possible harm's way. And also another clarification, I think it appears that you're not quite informed upon what interface housing is. Interface is a housing unit solely dedicated to children that are abusive towards others and physically and are known offenders of the law, which puts the child into immediate jeopardy, which I can not only imagine that the social worker, if she has any sense of care and for the preservation of the dignity of that child, would also be very concerned with. So I think it's a very valid concern that she didn't want to put this child in the interface housing. With that being said, that addresses my concerns, and I'd like to turn it over to Justin, who has some other concerns as well.
Thank you, Austin. So one of my main ones is you brought up the sense of being loved. And we do see that 8-year-olds can feel the sense of being loved. You stated so yourself. But if you're sitting in a dark corner in a hospital while there are drunk people sitting 10 feet away from you, puking on the floor, you have thugs being brought in with tattoos everywhere, possibly gang members, do you feel loved sitting there? If you're in a hospital and people are rushing through the ER and someone has a traumatic injury, there's blood flowing out, do you feel loved sitting there? No. If you're trying to condone a sense of feeling loved or cared for, Maria taking the child home with her was the most optimal thing she could do. You think taking her to interface where she could possibly be abused overnight, where there's not enough staff to watch over everyone. Maybe there's not enough beds because they're already overbooked. She's not feeling loved there either. These are all things that, they may break the boundaries or muddle the boundaries just a little, but if it's muddle boundaries, possibly save a life, Maria should side with saving a life.
We also agree, of course, that there are boundaries that exist and should exist between a social worker and the child that she has been entrusted to care for. But at the same time, later on we heard you say that there would be a conflict of interest if she were to involve herself with the child. And it seemed like you just kind of left it at that and didn't really fully explain what the conflict of interest would be. Later on, you said there would be a conflict of interest and that the social worker, after having taken the child to her home, would feel the need to back off and distance herself from the child after having taken her home. So I thought that was problematic. It's just kind of hard to see. Maybe she feels some kind of guilt. Maybe that was what you guys were implying, but that just seemed unclear to me. And then at another time too, you talked about the lying, which we have addressed given our utilitarian standpoint. And then you just said that's just morally wrong from a professional standpoint, but you didn't really explain why, and just kind of left that as an ad hoc statement. So that was unclear too. Max, you want to say?
Just real quick, you mentioned how kids are impressionable. Justin touched on it too. But it seems to me that denying a child that's been denied many times before won't do nearly as much good as upholding a case of apparent human dignity by having a social worker take her in, or take the child in and be like, here, come, be here. I'm going to uphold your human dignity right now. That'll do so much more good than denying a child that only knows denial. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Judges, you now have 1 minute to confer, and 10 minutes to ask one question and one follow-up.